Aita for reminding my dad he didn't pay child support. Growing up, I never truly knew my father. He was always in and out of my life, a fleeting presence that never seemed to stick around long enough for me to build any real connection. My mom and he would frequently clash, often arguing over his constant absence and the one issue that kept resurfacing, his failure to pay child support. The arguments were a staple of my childhood, their voices raised in frustration and disappointment. As the years went by, their dynamic became increasingly strained, and by the time my mom passed away, their relationship was more like a cold, distant memory than anything resembling a partnership. Now, living in the house that my mom left behind, I try to move forward. I share this space with my girlfriend and her child, trying to make the best of what's left, holding on to whatever semblance of normalcy we can find. But even in adulthood, my relationship with my dad has remained unchanged. After my mom's death, he reached out sporadically, like a man who wanted to pick up where we left off, but it was always half-hearted. Every time he made an attempt to connect, it felt like there was an underlying agenda, like his need to form a bond with me was more about making things easier for his new wife or girlfriend than it ever was about me. It always felt selfish, like an obligation he only felt because it served his own purposes, not because he actually cared about making up for lost time. More recently, my dad's health has taken a turn for the worse. He had a bed wreck, an accident that left him needing more help than ever. But his living situation wasn't much better. His apartment had only stairs, making it difficult for him to move around. So, he and his new wife started suggesting that they move into my house. My home, an old-school ranch-style house with only one level, seemed to be their solution to his mobility issues. The idea that they would just take over my space without any real discussion or consideration for my feelings bothered me more than I'd like to admit. When they proposed it, I told him no. His response was one of disbelief, almost as if he couldn't fathom why I would say no. "Why don't you trust me?" he asked, his voice tinged with hurt. "I'd pay rent," he added, as if that would somehow make up for everything. But I couldn't bring myself to believe that this was about anything more than convenience. I told him that it wasn't about the rent. It wasn't about money or space or even his need for a place to stay. It was about trust. I couldn't trust him because he had never once paid child support when I was growing up, despite my mom's constant struggle to make ends meet. I couldn't just forget that, no matter how much time had passed. His wife immediately chimed in, accusing me of being rude, of bringing up the past unnecessarily. But what did they expect? My dad had never been there for me, and now they were acting as though I was supposed to just open up my home to them without any real acknowledgement of the hurt and disappointment that had built up over the years. I responded coldly, "Maybe you should ask one of your 5 kids or one of my dad's 3 other children for help, because I'm not going to be the one to step up. I'm one of 9, and my dad has never once stepped up for me." Their faces changed. They were offended, accusing me of dragging up old wounds, but I wasn't going to apologize. I told them straight up, "Your attitude isn't going to mesh with mine in the long run." I wasn't going to pretend that everything was okay just because they wanted it to be. They couldn't erase the years of neglect and broken promises. And just like that, I found myself being escorted out of the hospital. My dad was still there, but the atmosphere had shifted. I was the one causing trouble, they said. I was the one upsetting the delicate balance they had tried to create. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent my whole life being pushed aside, and now, when I finally spoke up for myself, I was the one who had to leave. Update 1. After being asked to leave the hospital, I felt the tension between my father and me had gone beyond the breaking point. I couldn't understand how he could treat me this way, even disregarding my emotions while I was just trying to protect the values I believe in. I left the hospital in anger and disappointment, feeling as though I had been betrayed. In the following days, my father and his wife didn't contact me, but I couldn't stop thinking about that confrontation. The feeling of powerlessness in maintaining a relationship with my father grew stronger. I realized that no matter how hard I tried, he always did everything for his own benefit, and I couldn't keep living in such a false relationship. A week later, I received a call from my father. His voice sounded tired and anxious, as if he had been preparing for this conversation for a long time. "Can you meet me for a moment?" he asked, his voice no longer as strong as before. I stayed silent for a moment, debating whether I should meet him. Eventually, I decided to go, but this time, I wouldn't remain silent. I wanted to understand more about his attitude and why he could treat me like this. When I met him, I didn't know where to start. But before I could say anything, he spoke. "Son, I know you're very angry with me. I don't want to ruin our relationship, but I just want to find a safe place to stay," he said, his voice weak. "I don't have anyone else to rely on but you." At that moment, a new wave of anger surged within me. How could he say such words without acknowledging the harm he had caused me? How could he ask me for help when he had never once supported me? "You say you have no one but me to rely on. Then why have you never thought about helping me? All these years, have you ever thought about me?" I asked, my voice firm. "You're not just someone looking for a place to stay. You're my father. But you've done nothing to build a relationship with me. What do you expect me to do with that absence?" He lowered his head and said nothing. I could see regret in his eyes, but that couldn't change the fact that I had felt abandoned for far too long. "You can help me," he said softly. "I just want one more chance." But I couldn't easily forgive him. I had learned that in complicated family relationships, sometimes forgiveness is not the solution. I wondered if it was worth continuing to support a father who had never helped me, or if I should protect myself and not let myself fall into the trap of injustice again. "You can't keep hurting me and asking for my forgiveness over and over," I said, my eyes filled with resolve. "I can't keep helping someone who has never done anything to help me." He didn't say anything else, and I knew this conversation had come to an end. As I walked out of his house, I felt that I had made a difficult but right decision. This relationship couldn't continue without real change from both sides, and I was ready to move on, even if it was a journey that could be lonely and full of challenges. Update 2. The next day, as I sat at home, trying to process the thoughts about my meeting with my father, I received an unexpected message from my stepmother. She told me that my father was in the hospital and his condition was very serious. A feeling of anxiety and confusion welled up inside me. Even though I had decided not to help him anymore, hearing that my father was in danger, I couldn't completely abandon him. I rushed to the hospital, my heart filled with conflicting emotions. I didn't know if I could face my father again, especially since things between us had not been resolved. But I felt I had to go, at least to see how he was. When I entered the hospital room, I saw my father lying on the bed, his face gaunt, with a deep sigh every time he tried to speak. His wife stood by his side, her eyes red, as if she didn't know what to do in this situation either. "Son, you've come?" my father asked, his voice weak. I didn't respond immediately. My mind was filled with all the pent-up emotions, the unanswered questions. I felt like I was standing at a crossroads, unsure of which path to take. But then I saw his eyes on me, and I knew that this could be the only chance for things to change. "Why did you never think about us? Why didn't you ever make any effort to make things different?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why has everything between us been so hard?" He looked at me for a moment as if thinking. "Son, I don't know what to say. But you have to understand that I was wrong in many ways. I didn't know how to fulfill my duty as your father. And now, I just want a chance to make things right." At that moment, I couldn't hold back my emotions anymore. All the pain, the anger, the years of abandonment, they all flooded back. "Make things right?" I said, my voice almost breaking. "You've done nothing all your life, and now you want to make things right? Do you think I can forgive that easily?" His wife sat beside him, trying to speak softly. "Son, he truly regrets it. We can't change the past, but we can change the future. He just wants a chance to start over." I sat silently, feeling stuck and drained. These apologies were too late, too vague. But I couldn't let myself fall into the trap of forgiveness just because of guilt or their requests. "You've never done anything to show that you deserve that chance. I can't be deceived anymore. I can't be the child who always forgives without receiving anything in return," I said, not taking my eyes off my father. But then I realized something. Even though my father couldn't change the past, And even though I couldn't change the years that had passed, I could at least change the way I faced it. I didn't have to keep living in the shadow of disappointment and anger. That was when I decided to let go, not because I forgave my father, but because I didn't want to continue living with old wounds. I can't help you anymore, but I don't want to see you suffer. I won't carry this heavy stone anymore, I said, my voice now lighter but full of determination. At that point, my father didn't say anything else. His wife held my hand, feeling the heaviness in the air. And I knew, although this family life would never be easy, this was the moment I learned the most important lesson. Sometimes we have to stand up and protect ourselves, not just for others, but for our own lives. Update 3. After that tense confrontation, I felt a great weight lifted off my shoulders. The years of living in anger, disappointment, and the feeling of being abandoned no longer haunted me. Even though my father was still lying there, his eyes full of regret, I knew I had made the right decision. Life isn't always easy, and family isn't always a source of comfort, but I learned that forgiveness isn't something easy, and sometimes letting go is the only way to heal. The next day, I left the hospital without that heavy feeling in my heart. I didn't regret standing up for myself because I knew I couldn't change the past, but I could decide how I live in the present. My father could still change if he truly wanted to, but I no longer held on to vague expectations. I had learned how to move forward on my own path without letting old wounds pull me back. With Nathan, we spent time together, sharing our emotions and thoughts during the stressful time that had passed. He had always been supportive and understanding, helping me feel that no matter how difficult things got, we would always be there for each other. I knew that, even though family wasn't perfect, we could build healthy relationships, starting with the decisions we made every day. Things don't always go the way we want, but I found peace in learning to accept what couldn't be changed and focusing on what could. I couldn't change my father, but I could change how I faced him and myself. And that was the true strength I found, in forgiving myself and in building my own life, no matter how difficult it might be. Update 4. After a while, everything gradually returned to normal, but I could clearly feel the change within myself. The relationship between Nathan and me grew even closer. We were not only lovers, but also best friends, sharing all our emotions and challenges in life. Together, we created a safe space where we could trust each other and overcome all the difficulties we faced. Although I still found it hard to think about my father, I no longer felt haunted by the old wounds. Every day, I focused on the positive things, spending time taking care of myself and building relationships with those around me. I understood that even though the past could be painful, there was no reason to let it control my life anymore. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could change how I responded and how I lived in the present. One day, while I was working, I received a call from an unknown number. When I answered, I recognized it was my father. This time, his voice sounded different, no longer firm or cold like before. "Son, I want to apologize again. I know you've suffered a lot, and I feel guilty for not fulfilling my responsibilities, but I want to make things right. I want you to know that I have changed. If you can give me a chance, I will do everything I can to start over," he said, his voice low and filled with regret. I was silent for a moment, thinking about everything that had happened. I didn't know if I could fully forgive my father, but I realized that in order to move forward with peace, I needed to make a clear choice. You can change, and I hope that happens, but I can't forget what's happened. I can't live in the shadow of the past anymore, I replied, my voice soft but firm. If you truly change, we can start over, but I won't accept anything less than respect and fairness. I didn't know what my father would do next, but I knew one thing for sure. My life was no longer bound by his mistakes, and most importantly, I had found the strength to keep living, not just for others, but for myself. My story with my father wasn't over, but I no longer felt weighed down when I thought about it. My relationships with my family, with Nathan, and with myself had been rebuilt from the decisions I had bravely made. Life was never simple, but now I could face it stronger than ever before.